Thanks, Gaelic. And good morning, Professor Lambert. It's been a fascinating kind of discussion thus far. And I think most people that will be listening in today will be kind of saying to themselves that because they contracted COVID, it changed their lives because of, I suppose, the legacy of COVID-19 and so forth. So obviously, those cohort of people there's many, will be wanting answers from, in some ways, how their life changed from contracting COVID, and then that kind of legacy in relation to chronic fatigue, and all the kind of symptoms that comes with long COVID and so forth. So my first question, Professor Lambert, is in relation to the evolution of the virus itself. And obviously there was a period from, say, February 20 to probably March 21 where, nobody was vaccinated as such. Is there a kind of like a correlation between those that, between the vaccine, but no, particularly at that period where the vaccine wasn't readily available, those that contracted COVID-19 and still had symptoms of long COVID still to this day? I don't know if you could answer that, or if you understand my question.
At first, when I looked at the data, it sort of seemed that, we know these vaccines are mRNA vaccines. They don't prevent infection, but they do prevent you from progressing to serious acute illness. So vaccines are a good thing. The question is, if you get a vaccine, is it going to prevent you from getting long COVID? And the answer is, getting vaccination hasn't really decreased the number of patients who, are at risk for long COVID. So that's not the way these vaccines work. So if there is a benefit, it's a minimal benefit. So I think the only benefits the only benefit of vaccines, and it's an important benefit, is they keep you from dying if you get COVID, but they don't keep you from getting infected, and they don't necessarily keep you from getting long COVID.
Okay, thanks very much. Just my second question, and I know you've touched onto it already, is in relation to the low dose naltrexone, and it sounds like the initial evidence is quite good. Could you just elaborate on the kind of the evidence thus far in the pilot project?
Right. Well, LDN's been used for many years. There was studies done back in the days of HIV and AIDS where there was no treatment for HIV and AIDS, and placebo-controlled trial treating people with LDN or placebo, and it improved their quality of life. They had left. So LDN does two things. It seems to decrease inflammation, and it also has some immune modulating effect, And that's the second problem. We haven't even discussed this in terms of the problems with long COVID. It's not just the brain inflammation. The second problem is patients have some kind of an immune damage. They have some kind of immune exhaustion as part of this process as well. So LDN is focusing both on brain inflammation and some immune modulatory effect. Now, based on the pilot that I've done, I think the next thing to do is to do some kind of a placebo-controlled trial to act in a bigger study, and then cross over people from treatment to placebo, after a few months to do a definitive study. But I think the reality is that there is at the present time, people are just following patients with long COVID, bringing them back every 3 months, and some of them just aren't getting better. So, my approach is to look at the literature and see, what early information there is in terms of what is helping patients with long COVID. And I think we now have this published, and I think it's preliminary data, but I think it's been used in many other situations before. It's a safe product to use, and like I said, the study that we did showed clinical benefit to patients who had been sick for 333 days on average. Within 2 months, they started showing improvement. So I just think it's out there that this is something we should, start thinking about, rather than just continuing to follow patients every 3 months, draw research bloods on them and tell them to come back in 3 months. We have to actually start some interventions, or start piloting some interventions to support our patients in Ireland.
Okay. And Professor Lambert, in your professional career, is there any comparison relation to, obviously there is other neurological conditions that have kind of the same kind of, I suppose, symptoms to those that are suffering from long COVID. But is there any, parallel between other conditions that you've witnessed in your professional career in relation to long COVID?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this before. I was asked this question. I see patients who get a tick-borne infection, and here they are years later still unwell with it. As for example, I see farmers, I see forestry workers, I see people from all over Ireland who get bitten by a tick. They got a short course of antibiotics, and they're coming to see me 2 years later with a lot of the same symptoms, in illnesses. So there are other conditions, that I think are this, and I think the whole issue that's been brought up now, there's a big population in Ireland of patients with fibromyalgia, patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, and I hypothesize that some kind of infection might have triggered, this condition years ago that we have yet to identify. So Lyme's one. There's other tick-borne infections, and I think now we have long COVID, and I'm hoping the research from long COVID will, there's no money goes into Lyme research. Hopefully the money that does go into long COVID research will benefit patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, fibromyalgia, and Lyme disease.
Okay, and my final question on a more positive note is in relation to recovery. And obviously everybody's different. What's the percentage thus far? This may be not completely scientific, but thus far, that somebody has made a complete recovery in relation to, the symptoms that they had around long COVID, and they're back to what they were prior to, contracting COVID-19. So what does recovery look like, and what's the rate of recovery in relation to, the patients that you've seen?
Right. Well, I really can't give you that data because we're still this is new. We're still in the process of analyzing this. One of my my doctoral students, Dr. Brendan McKelly, he's doing the UCD Newman Fellowship in the long COVID. He's the one that took the lead on many of these publications. We're now in the process of looking at that 155 patients. From a year ago, and we're going to do a follow-up and do an evaluation of what percentage of those 155 are back to normal and what percentage are still sick, and repeat a questionnaire in them. So we're in the process of doing that. But the good news is that, while it's 30% at 1 year, it's less at 15 months, it's less at 18 months, but there's still a population of patients that just don't get better, or they sort of get better and they try to go back into the workplace and they crash again and they get relapse of all their symptoms. So I actually say that, COVID-19 is a bit of a scary virus. It damages the brain, it damages the immune system, and it's not just the common cold virus. So I continue to wear my mask. I don't want to catch COVID myself. I don't want to be out of work, and I keep on encouraging people to take this virus seriously. We're still learning about it, and it's not going away.
Thanks, Professor Lambert.